All right. Holy cow. Is this working? Are we good? Will C from the internet should be happy. Is my screen working? Can you guys see my screen? Okay. Yeah, I think I'm ready to cut to it. All right, sweet. Holy crap, that light's bright. I'm going to close the doors, though. So, hey, if you guys want to listen to a discussion, and I won't even say listen, if you want to participate in a discussion about phishing investigations and defining the qualities that define ultimately a maturity model of phishing investigations, please come to the room. I'm going to close them so that way everyone that wants to enjoy networking and talking can do so. Just, keep on pushing that door. And a big shout out to Will C. for calling me and getting me back on schedule. I'm sorry for running a few minutes late. I had some very nice and important people to talk to. Sweet. Okay, so this is an open discussion. I've come up with, I don't know, it's not even really me, but I struggled actually a little bit at work to come up with some thoughts and write them down on paper. And I thought no better way than to consult my top 90 favorite friends and tell them and have them tell me how wrong I am, because that's ultimately what I want here. I want everyone, including myself here, to learn something and hopefully come to some common agreement about something that doesn't exist, as far as I know anyway. So, exploring a maturity model for phishing investigations. I want to start off, I don't know, let's see what my slide deck tells me to do. Hi, I'm Brandon Murphy. You can hit me up on Twitter at ZoomEquipped, on our Slack. If you're Will C, you can continue to DM me on Slack and harass me for starting late. So we started off, all right, so let me give a little bit of background. I am a threat intelligence analyst for Principal Financial Group. It's a brand new service to Principal. We don't have an a threat intelligence group. You think we'll take call-ins? No, I'm not taking call-ins, Will. And so we just started this threat intelligence service, and initially we started to get pulled in a lot of different directions, right? We started to have interest from the business units and everyone else, and it was like, hey, threat intelligence can do this, can do that. And we were like, holy cow, guys, you guys got to slow down. We're doing everything in a very immature state, and all we're doing is fighting those fires that you guys are throwing at us, which doesn't help anybody. And so we wanted to kind of take a step back and say, let's define some use cases that we can formally offer to our business as a threat intelligence service. And not only begin to offer those, but establish some level of maturity in them. And so we came up with some use cases. I'll describe those in a minute, but I want to talk about this maturity model, if you will. It's based off of the NIST cybersecurity framework. There's the big PDF, it's version 1.1 that was released in April of 2018, that we leveraged this, and it has a 4-tier model, which is partial, risk-informed, repeatable, and adaptive, going from least mature to most mature as you go down that list. And it's interesting, when I was reading through the cybersecurity framework, now it doesn't talk much about threat intelligence, but the NIST documentation that does talk about TI is focused on that TI is a service enhancer. And that's my words. That you can take your vulnerability management process and sprinkle a little bit of threat intelligence on there, and it's going to enhance your vulnerability management service. Or you can take your third-party audit risk assessment process, sprinkle a little threat intelligence on that, and bam, is that what Emerald says? Bam! You can have some more mature third-party assessments. But there was nothing in there that spoke to what does a mature threat intelligence offering look like when you're starting to sprinkle that on there, right? Like, that's the difference between, like, I don't know, salt and, like, kosher salt or, like, sea salt, right? Like, it's 3 different degrees of salt. It's all salt, but it's a little bit different. So, oh, hey, that's kind of why. Sorry, I jumped ahead on my slides. So when we broke out our use cases, we broke them out like this. And actually, we came up with 30-plus different service offerings, if you will. We call them use cases because, I don't know, we didn't want to call them service offerings. And so today's really about that first one of track phishing email waves or campaigns sent to your organization's users. That was Principal when I typed it up this morning. But and then some other ones that are more vulnerability focused. And then events, so report on specific cyber security events. So that could be things like WannaCry or even things that kind of happen after the fact. So a good example of that might be ransomware being deployed at a bank down in South America, and someone asks us, hey, can you tell us about that particular event? How can we learn from it? And then finally, create and maintain threat actor profiles. So kind of tracking the adversaries and keeping an eye on the ones that are interesting to us. So those are our use cases. So today's topic focuses on that first one and a maturity model. Keeping in mind it was partial, risk-informed, repeatable, and adaptable. So when I went to go describe a maturity model of phishing investigations, I focused not necessarily on, I don't know, what's probably not a common maturity model, but I focused on like what are the qualities that a mature state of phishing investigations might demonstrate. And so I focused on qualities. So we'll just kind of get going here. And so this is kind of the open conversation part. So I've created here a very short list, and we'll kind of step through them. And so we have this awesome, what was this called? Where's Aaron? What was this thing called? It was a throw mic. I don't know for sure. That's what a drop box. Fuzzy box. So this is actually a microphone. So this is like, guys, this is going to be an open conversation. If you don't participate, then it's just me talking, and it's going to get real boring real quick. So I want to hear your thoughts. So we have a partial, which is the lowest level of maturity of phishing investigations. And I have more than just this, but I wanted you guys to kind of think a little bit about it. The initial part was depending on your users to report it. And so this is a good example where maybe you don't have monitoring of your email. Maybe you don't have a real good method of your users to report phishing emails to your security team. I just don't want mic echo on that. And so you depend on your users to report that. Maybe that's an abuse at your domain email. Maybe there's a button there, but you depend on one of your employees to report that to you. Your detective and protective controls leverage atomic indicators. So this is, if you get a malicious email that has a Word document in it, you might take the hash of that email and block that. You might take the URL that is in a link of an email and block that. These are things that are very, very easy for the adversary to change. And you treat phishing emails as isolated events. One person reports it, you look at that one, you don't necessarily scope it to see, oh, that one person got it, but 10 other people got it. Or that one person got it, but 14 of those emails were dropped by our email gateway product. And so you kind of treat them as one-off incidents. And I'll kind of step through this, I guess, just kind of keep this stuff in mind. I want you guys to shout out, though, ideas for what you think a partial or kind of the lowest level of maturity looks like for phishing investigations. Notice I don't talk too much about end-user awareness, which I think is a component of ultimately combating phishing, but I took it from that threat intelligence perspective. So I don't know. That's an okay thing to talk about, I think. But so I'll pause here, actually. And if anyone has anything to mention about a low maturity threat intelligence or threat investigation.
So I guess you could say it's very reactive. Again, because you're depending on these things or things that have blown up already, right? So your AV product might go up, so that investigating it might have been an email that popped thing, right?
Yeah, highly reactive. I don't know if that thing's working. Maybe you have to hold it up a little bit closer.
Hold it up like this?
Yeah, you got to eat that thing. That's what we needed right there. So if you get the, what do we call that? The catch box, that's it. I was going to call it the plush mic.
Same thing.
Yeah, plush mic. Yeah, so very reactive in this nature. You are dependent on somebody within your organization telling you about that. What's up, man?
I would say a lot of them are false positives as well, where you will get a lot of spam and other things that people think that are, depending on the training that is within the company.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. A high false positive rate of your reports. You get spam, mailing list kind of crap instead of actual fish. Yeah, I like that idea. I think, so one thing to think about, that's a very good point. So when you think about that from a partial perspective, from that lowest maturity, keep in mind that that's something that we want to improve. So as we get into repeatable and adaptive, perhaps automation will start taking care of some of that noise for you. And perhaps you'll have a score for your employees of how good they report a malicious document versus spam, things of that nature. So I think that's really good. Like there's momentum there that you can build on throughout the maturity model. Let's keep that in mind as we go through. Anyone else? Parody. Talk close.
Is there a specific individual that can be targeted in a company just because they browse a certain server? So is it the same? And if you constantly reply, if you expect your employees to let you know about an issue, some employees won't. So how do you
deal with that? Yeah, so I think there were kind of two questions there. The second one is pretty easily addressed, right? So if you're dependent on your employees to report it to you, and some people just won't, right? Like they're going to miss it, or let's hope that they don't fall for it. Did that work? Then I think that's very easy to speak to within that maturity model, right? So you'll have as you continue to go up this maturity model, you'll have a higher degree of reports. So let's say, I don't know what the average is. Let's just say the average is 7%. Well, 7% report rate might be a partial. And as your program matures up into that adaptive, you would want an 80% report rate or something of that effect. So I think that's a really good. That'd be like a key performance indicator of how well that your process is doing against phishing. I think that's a really good point. Anyone else?
I just had a question about your question. Are you referring to like targeted phishing attacks, like spear phishing or whaling?
Are there specific profiles of individuals? Before again, I'm fairly new in that domain. But when you think about Walmart and the data breach, how many times were specific people receiving that type of email? Is that really a warning to something big? Because
Yep.
It's a tester. You're just testing.
Yep. Gotcha. Yeah, so the question, just to repeat it, was more around that targeted actor, or I'm sorry, the targeted victim, if you will. And I use victim in quotes, and actually I speak to victims as quotes before. They're not really victims, right? So do actors target them? Absolutely, right? So we see, in particular with what we call executive impersonation emails, we'll see the CFO get an email from the CEO, or we'll see a financial controller of some sort that has the ability to move money, or even using LinkedIn data to take a secretary and make it look like their boss, right? Not even high-level executives, but just like a director to a subordinate, if you will. So we see that targeting happen across the board, and that's one where. I don't know from a maturity model when we go to investigate that, how that plays in. That's kind of interesting. We do talk about victimology in a little bit, where you can start to understand those relationships. And I think that maybe comes into the risk-informed and repeatable aspects, where you start to understand, like, even though it's not a high-level executive or CEO, maybe that's just a director looking like they're sending an email to a subordinate, et cetera. We got a question back from Chris, if you don't mind throwing the catch box. Catch box? Catch mic? I don't know.
That's something that's new. So I'm just curious what you think as far as a partial maturity level being applied based off of the amount of artifacts that you might have during an investigation. So if let's say you've got message headers, but you have no exchange message logs, like delivery logs, you don't necessarily have trail. Does that?
Yeah, so to your point, just to make sure I'm hitting it on key here, you're really talking about the amount of data that you have to use within your investigation to pivot further or find those additional indicators that you might otherwise not. Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So where you mentioned very particularly the message headers, maybe the way that your users report it to you, they forward it not as an attachment, right? And so you lose some of those details. I think that would be really reflective of a partial versus a more mature state. I think that's a really good point, actually, talking about the metadata that you might be able to collect off of those. Yeah, thank you. So I'll keep that in mind as we go through, like speak up as we go into risk informed. So if you say that with partial, you only have the body of the message, or even less than that, you only have the sender and the subject and no body or no attachments, what does that look like as you continue to go through, all the way up to adaptive, where you have the complete SMTP transaction being parsed off the wire as you get it? I think that's a very easily progressed through the maturity model. Sweet. Anyone else on partial? All right. So risk informed. So this is kind of where we start to see some more threat intelligence stuff. And so on the previous one with partial, you might not have any knowledge of common threat actors. And so into risk informed, you start to get an understanding that the emotet actors and the Hansator actors, you at least kind of can start to associate the names of those people, of those particular threat actors, into they leverage email as their delivery methodology. You start to consume and share at this state. And so so this would be a good question. This is one thing that I actually struggled with, was I think sharing back to our groups is a really positive thing to do. But what does sharing look like at a risk-informed level? Are you only consuming, at this point? So before we kind of talked about your users are reporting your emails to you. And at this point, are you starting to consume out of other organizations sharing with you, but maybe you're not sharing back? What does that process look like at this risk-informed? A defined process. And so do you have a methodology of, a written and documented, formalized, if you will, process, even if it's not adhered to 100%, of how you respond to those reports when they come to you? And here, so I kind of missed it on this last slide, but where we talk about those atomic indicators, and now we're talking about detect and protective controls of network and host artifacts. This is actually direct reference from the pyramid of pain. And so it starts to move up that stack of pyramid of pain, which is more difficult to implement as a defender, but it's also more impactful on an adversary when you start to put in detective and protective controls at the tip of that pyramid of pain. And then I threw in education awareness here. So I think at risk-informed level, you start to have some. That could be as easy as hiring a third party to do phishing awareness testing against your employees, or maybe that's just you talking to your employees very broadly about the types of phish that you receive. So yeah, I'd like to hear some more things around like the metadata and log collection, as well as some of those other artifacts that you might be able to collect as we move up that maturity model.
So what I've seen in our company in the past.
Move that guy a little bit closer.
Oh, sorry about that.
There you go.
There we go. So pretty much in the past, at this point in time, I would say you're almost gathering data from outside companies, what other people are seeing.
Yeah.
You're also looking at like network connections, C2, servers, trying to make a connection of where this is all coming from, and if multiple phishing attempts are linked to each other. If they're all coming from the same country,
yeah,
you can pretty much know that, hey, this is the same threat actor or guess that the
Yep.
same threat actor's out there, and then try to tie that into, okay, what's next? And in our previous role, we would get a lot of O365 phishing. But we were able to tie that into the same threat actor that was doing stuff for Apple. And they were targeting different companies depending on what their technology was.
Perfect.
And then using those companies to then send more phishing out from them
Yep.
once they compromised an account.
Yeah.
And it just bounced around. So I think at this point, it's more collecting it and less of stopping the bleeding
Yep.
than like actually getting to the preventative.
Yeah, I like that. You actually touched on a topic that I didn't put in here, but I wrote down in my notes, which was the ability to identify related emails by overlap in IOCs or the theme of the phish, despite different URLs, subjects, and attachments. And so even though those atomic indicators might be different, at this level of risk-informed, you're kind of able to put those, before we talked about each phish is kind of a unique event, and here you're starting to see that kind of hierarchy of there's something bigger going on here, right? And despite there being multiple different emails, those are all similar themes. So let's start aggregating that into one event instead of multiple.
Yep, and so some of the techniques and procedures that I've personally used, I guess, in this phase would be drilling down deeper into like the message ID, searching based on message ID, or just the domain name at the root level, right? Or looking for a specific, say multiple people reported it, but yet you see they're using some kind of word changer, but there's a specific single word thread that you can point to that one artifact and then just scrub through all the whole.
Yeah, so, and I like that you talked about message ID because that's a particular piece of header that oftentimes is not logged by our email gateways, et cetera. And so it kind of talks back to what Chris was talking about the metadata that you're able to collect and continuing to advance that as you go up. The other part that you talked about there was about like different subjects, right? So, or different word lists, right? So where we could have an invoice theme, right? And it could be, DHL and FedEx and UPS and USPS are all themed together. And then it's invoice or, what's that international piece of thing where you have to declare what your thing is? A declaration, right? So it could be invoice or declaration or, a word play of that, right? And so being able to recognize those that, hey, there's a pattern here, even though all those atomic indicators are different, I think that very well belongs in risk informed.
I was going to bring something up, what he said, domain name. Actually searching for it out on VirusTotal and using their map function, a lot of times you can find other domains linked to that domain and prevent other phishing attempts, because then you can find those on URL query is a good resource for that. Tie those together. And then also thinking about the whole spear phishing, what we've also seen is when they start blasting you with a bunch of them across the board, just trying to get whoever will go there, usually they'll send out like a spearfish here or there, so that way you're too busy with all the noise, and then they're trying to target certain people as well, and you can tie those all together.
So when you see that noise kind of mixed in with some spearfish, are they normally similarly themed?
Typically not. What they're trying to do is actually act as somebody within the company that they've already fished, and then reach out to them, or act as like one of your CIOs or somebody at a higher level to basically scare them into answering right away or clicking on it right away without thinking.
Okay.
They give it to you, but not somebody else, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Sorry, I said they're more likely to give it to that person versus a phishing email, because it looks like it's from somebody they know. So.
Okay. So at that risk-informed level, let me just make sure I understand this. So at the risk-informed level, really what you're being able to recognize kind of those more executive impersonation emails, or
Any of the links.
any of them. Okay, all based off of commonalities or even disparate.
Typically, it's from where the source is coming from.
Okay.
You can usually find a link with it's from the same country, it's from the same server, hosting sites. They usually stand up a bunch of the same hosting sites across the board with different DNS. They try to randomize it so it doesn't look like it's the same. But you can kind of guess, hey, this is all kind of happening at the same time, and make an educated guess that it's linked together.
I like that. Okay, so and to your point earlier, and this kind of all culminates into really being able to pivot. So before, when we were focused on at that partial level, hey, a user reports that, and this is what that is, right? Like this is this is everything that happened in that phishing wave. It's kind of a very immature way to think. And as you grow out, you're starting to use now external resources that provide you additional context, passive DNS, other websites, et cetera, VirusTotal, like you said, to perhaps find and scope the bigger incident. I like that. I like that, using the external resources to learn more. I like that a lot. What else?
I was wondering if this would include setting up with like your FPS records, your DMARC, things like that to kind of automate and maybe
if you shake it, it doesn't work.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
See if you might actually be outputting a botnet.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So okay. I'll just re-summarize because I heard you. Okay.
I'll just talk louder next time.
Yeah, that might be all right. So about detective and protective controls that are ultimately implemented by other organizations that report back to you, right? So when you talk about DMARC, that's exactly what that is, right? I might put a DMARC record out there and say, you guys let me know anytime that my SPF fails. Send me that forensic report or whatever that's called. I don't focus, so that's one thing that I don't focus much on this maturity model, is because I take it more from it happened, let's do an investigation of it, and not so much that preventive, until we get into some of the more mature states. And I think that's where this will come in, is because at this repeatable level that I have next, we talk a little bit about producing technical recommendations for how to combat it. And so I think that fits in there. I mean, like, how many people here have an SPF record for every domain that they own? I can raise my hand on that as well. How many of them have them for domains that don't have anything to do with email? That's good, right? And so I think that's kind of, especially when we talk about the SPF records in particular, is do you have a recognition that even domains that have nothing to do with email, they could just be website hosting domains, but you still want a drop all, right? That -all SPF record on those domains, so that way no one can use that to spam out from that domain. And then continuing further, right? You have DMARC records for those. That I think that maybe has a place in here. I hadn't thought about it because it's kind of outside the scope of what I was looking at. Right. But it's probably got a place in a maturity model for your how we combat phishing. Wow, I'm really going over on time. What's up, Chris?
I just want to ask really quick.
Just holler real loud.
Yeah, I just want to hear some clarification on sharing. Are you talking more about internal sharing within a team, or are you saying sharing out within the organization?
That's a really good question, actually. I would actually throw that right back at you. What do you think?
Yeah, so I guess if we're talking about sharing across other organizations, I think this is too early in the maturity model, because to me it seems as if we're still learning how to gather knowledge so much as even format it in a way that other organizations can consume.
I like that.
We can still be learning how to consume it ourselves.
Yep, perfect. So at this state, we're really just focusing on gathering data for ourselves, and we're too immature at this state to share it out to other organizations in a consumable format. Did I get that right?
I would say internally, in between partial and risk informed, maybe you let your users know if it's something high impact.
Yeah.
To not click it. This is out there. If you
Sure.
see this, don't do this.
Yes.
While you're trying to rip it out of the system.
So maybe you're treating those phishing campaigns at this point that we've been able to correlate together at the higher level, and you're sending out a minimum level of education awareness.
Yes.
So more ad hoc, hey, there's this fire going on right now, make sure you don't click this stuff.
Yeah, but not for
All right.
everything. If it's a onesie twosie thing, you
Yeah.
can't be doing that. You'll
Sure.
turn your wheels too much.
Hey, thanks, man. Okay, so into the repeatable process. So for what it's worth, on your question about consuming and sharing, I agree 100%. At this point, and I put it out here I'm glad that you asked that question, because that's why I put sharing out there. In my process, I don't think that we're sharing here at all either. That really comes into the next step for me, is into repeatable. And so here we talk, in my opinion, we start talking about formal monitoring of external sources. So where you perhaps have mailing lists like FSI, SAC, Cyber Intel, or even things like, oh geez, I'm going to forget it, My Security Online blog, where they talk about the latest Emotet and Enhanced campaigns that are going. You have a formal responsibility for monitoring those sources for external awareness of potential phishing campaigns. Where we talked about education awareness. So before, where you're kind of like spitfire this email out to everyone, don't click this link if you got it, right? Here you're doing more targeted education and awareness. So, hey, we've seen payroll employees be targeted with this particular phish. I'm going to send out just to payroll employees, or people that have access to payroll data. You need to be aware of this because you might be targeted. And so to me, it's kind of interesting when we talk about communication, because we kind of, in my opinion, we go broad to hope to catch everything, into targeted of you are being targeted with this particular type of phish, and back into broad of these are the threat actors that are targeting our organization. Everyone needs to be aware of it. And it was interesting for me to step through that process, and hopefully somebody disagrees with me and can convince me otherwise. But and then at this state, we start to understand victimology. And so this is where we start to understand that this particular threat actor with this campaign is targeting our financial controllers, or they're targeting HR data, or they're targeting this particular type of employee within our organization, or maybe they're not. Maybe it's shotgun, right? Maybe all of these people showed up in the LinkedIn data breach 5 years ago. But you're starting to put together the connections and create a victimology. That was my thought. So consuming and sharing, here we speak again to that, and this is where I think we start sharing. We start sharing, yeah, I saw that same phish, right? Or you're starting to +1 that, or I saw that same phish, but my indicators were slightly different. I saw these hashes, and it was these unique URLs that Office document reached out to. You're starting to know your threat actors a little bit more, so now you know that Emotet is always delivered with a link that reaches out to an Office document that gets pulled down, it's downloaded by the user, and then executed, and then it's PowerShell. So you're starting to get to know your threat actors a little bit deeper, and then your detective controls and protective controls target their tools. So a really good example of this was a report that was just released the other day about Black Eye, which is a new phishing toolkit that is freely and open available. It replaces another one that was available straight up on GitHub, right? So you're starting to understand the tools that the phishing kit authors are using to produce their payload and their weaponization. So I'd like to hear anything else that people have around as we continue to mature up. Fire away, man.
At this stage, you share with the Slack channel for SecDSM?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is where you start sharing, right?
I was waiting for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually close with that channel name. But yeah, so I think at this point you start to share your information and you start to share somewhat unique details of your phishing campaigns as well. But yeah, I think at this point you can start to share.
Just in regards to sharing, is there any kind of worry as to how much to share, what to share, maybe give out too much company info or anything of that nature?
Yeah, that's kind of up to your own organization, to be honest with you. In my opinion, anyway. Please, somebody else have an opinion here. You all have opinions. You know the saying. Everyone has one.
You definitely want to deduct anything that's company related and just focus on the actual threat actor and what they're trying to target.
Yep.
I would say, and that kind of goes without saying with most companies, I would think.
Yep, redact the victim, right? Yep. And so a lot of times we'll see URLs that are unique for each victim, and generally that data is like base64 encoded inside of the link. And so it's really common to say, redacted base64 of the victim email, or to put that back in there base64 encoded and note that you did that of no@email.com or whatever, right? But if you redact, that's the only thing that I would say. If you redact, note that you did it.
One other thing just that I was kind of thinking is, as you go along this, depending on the size of your security team, basically the further you get out, the more people it takes. I would say if you have a smaller team, it gets harder and harder to get to this repeatable part and then an adaptive part. So
Absolutely.
then you're more reacting all the time at the partial. Versus at this point, this is where it kind of gets a little sketchy if you don't have enough people looking at these phishing attempts.
Yeah, and that's actually a good comment around human resources in order to support continue to move up. And that's one thing that we speak to earlier about your noise comment, right? And how do we start to remove the dependency of our human capital and help automate that stuff? And so maybe this is kind of that breaking point, to your point, where I see like you're either committed to this or you're going to continue to expend human capital to do it. It's kind of, this is where you start to invest money into it, in my opinion. Some of the other comments that I had written down was being able to differentiate between actors based on their common methodology of delivery or their payload or their targeting methodology. So this kind of speaks to that, getting to know your threat actors a little bit more. And on the education awareness side, I think at this level you're starting to, so before we kind of talked about like generic phishing, right? Like maybe you're using GoPhish on your own and you're using some templated stuff to do phishing testing. And at this point I kind of feel like we know our threat actors well enough that you're going to be delivering targeted phishing testing against users that are being targeted. You have the victimology here, so let's craft phishing emails and test the victims against it. So we're starting to focus here quite a bit.
And then I remember yesterday we were talking where maybe you might emulate those same phishing kits that they're using to make it look identical to give them that awareness.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, if we see a particular threat actor always use domain shadowing techniques, right? Maybe we set up our own domain and put a bunch of subdomains under it that are going to be malicious. But yeah, start to shadow your adversaries here. Anything else? Way in the back, man. Throw that guy the box. Let's see if it'll work. Catch it. You got it. No, it's dead. Sorry, failed box.
I was going to say, what about testing your users like shadowing, sending your own versions. I don't know if this is exactly what he's talking about, but sending your own versions of a phishing email to your own people and seeing how they react, and if they come back and tell you what happened, or if they just pretend like nothing happened. You know?
Yep.
Good way to test your folks.
Yep. So I think that there's different degrees of maturity within that aspect as well. So like at partial, you're probably not doing any of that, right? At risk informed, maybe you're doing generic testing, right? So maybe so there's open source products like GoFish and Kingfish that will do that for you, or I should say help you do that for you. And they have generic templates, right? So it's like the FedEx thing, right? Or I should not use a brand name, a parcel shipping company. And so maybe you'll emulate that, right? Like this is kind of the things that we see all the time. And then as you get into the more repeatable aspect of that, it's not so broad, right? And instead we start to focus down onto, we know that we're being targeted by this type of phishing campaigns. Let's focus on those and emulate them to our employees. And then I speak to that a little bit into the adaptive as well, where we start to actually predict what our adversaries are going to be doing based on what they have done, and test them against that as well. The most interesting metric that I've ever seen out of any of the phishing campaigns, out of the phishing tests that we've done, is the time to first click. Super interesting. If you can get your provider to do that, or you can generate that stat yourself, I think you'll be incredibly alarmed. And I use that stat as a motivating factor to know how fast I need to be responding within my organization to a phishing campaign. If my first click is 15 seconds after that email was sent, I have to be fast. And so as we start moving into adaptive, we start talking a little bit about those protective controls that will do that moving forward.
Just to add to that, also sharing those metrics with your upper management, the business management that doesn't get it, and nobody would click on that. And then showing how many people would actually click on something to sell that we need more people to support this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And also for different technologies just to block it in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good point.
That's the best is when they click on it and then you hand them the report.
It only takes once until the checkbook opens up on that, right? So I think you make a really good point though. And I think you're right. At that repeatable stage, I think is when you start to report those metrics up, right? This could be a key performance indicator that is being tracked by your senior management. I think that's a really good point to make. Along those same lines, I don't know. I had something in my head and I just lost it. I don't know. Sweet. So, anything else there? Sweet. So, adaptive. So, I talk about independent identification here. So, previously, we were kind of relying on our users or external sources like a mailing list or the threat intel sharing channel within Slack, external resources. And here, you can independently identify phishing campaigns that are coming into your environment. And one thing that I wrote down about independent identification was regardless of the delivery status of that phishing campaign. So if you have a pretty decent email gateway and it drops all of those phishing emails, would you know? At this state, you would, because there's still intelligence to be gathered from that. What was that email, even though it wasn't delivered? Who were the victims? What were the URLs? What was the methodology? And there's still tons of intelligence that you can gather by treating it as if it was delivered, even though it wasn't. And it's an interesting artifact, in particular when you start looking at some of the mail gateways that exist out there, that might or might not be possible. I thought that was an interesting. Independent identification regardless of the delivery status. You've got a consistent process for responding to it, be that a user reporting it, or you identifying it via an external source, or you independently identifying that. Education and awareness based on expected actor actions. So I can start to predict my victims here, right? I know that this particular threat actor that's targeting us is always going after my HR person. So I'm going to start to prep them, and I'm going to start putting education awareness campaigns against that. A really good example of that might be Hansator, which recently targeted, their themes were all UK-based banks, right? It was, hey, this is, I don't know, UK Bank 1, I don't want to use names, and then UK Bank 2, and they did that for about 2 weeks. They just targeted different UK-based banks. So you start to know what their actions are going, and maybe I can put in an education awareness or an advisory campaign to my potential targets around that. What's up, man?
This makes me think of like maybe leveraging that toolkit that was on GitHub
within the last year where it takes certificate transparency and you're modeling.
Yeah,
monitoring
SSL
that.
stream, cert stream, if I remember, and it was called Fisher. I know exactly what you're talking about, right? So that's a really good point. And before, where we started talking about using external resources, right? So what he's talking about is the certificate transparency logs and being able to look for brands that are maybe in line with your industry or your competitors. I'm a firm believer of monitoring for adversaries targeting your competitors is a pretty good precursor for what's going to happen to you. I'm a very firm believer of that, very firm. And so yeah, CertStream are using those methodologies, right? Where before we were using passive DNS, I think CertStream has a really good place in here as well, starting to move up into those things that they have to do, right? I like that. You can consume, share, and produce unique intelligence with external organizations, and that new part here is really about producing unique intelligence. So you're doing independent verification or independent identification. So now you're starting to notify those external organizations of phishing waves that have not yet been discovered by anybody else. So I feel like that belongs up here. Technical recommendations based on actor TTPs. So this kind of comes back to DMARC and SPF and those types of protective controls. You know, if you don't have them, this is where you're going to start suggesting those into the people that can control those methodologies. And then you communicate broadly within the organization. So this is kind of where I like talk broad, talk narrow, talk broad again, right? And so I think it's important that we talk about the threat actors at a very high level that are targeting our organization, because, you know, in my experience, a lot of these email targets are being picked up by third-party compromises at other websites. Like LinkedIn is a prime target, right? So if you were involved in the LinkedIn dump, you are being targeted by adversaries sending you email all the time. I know it. I track that. And so communicate broadly about that. And I think is a good thing. You know, hey, we're seeing this particular actor target us. This is what you can do as an employee to do it. So I'll pause there. What else you guys got? Like, this is the tip of the spear, right? Like, when we talk about phishing intelligence and phishing campaigns and awareness, like this is it. What else do you guys have at this level?
Maybe where you're dissecting phishing kits.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, you might chase it down and then tear apart the phishing kit and take all the maybe their tools and techniques and procedures, and then using that and then informing your buddies and enriching your tools to make YAR rules or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
I think so. You bring up a good point, and it's something that I actually haven't written down yet, which is really around, at this point, you start to combat adversaries. So we had Jason Williams from Emerging Threats come here and talk about his tracking of phishing kits. And it was an interesting aspect to me where if you can start to track phishing kits instead of the unique deployments of those phishing kits, maybe you can get somewhere. Maybe you can start to gain some traction here. But yeah, so a good example, man, if you can pull down a phishing kit that's publicly available via directory traversal or commonly named zip of that phishing kit, if you haven't, did we record that talk? No. Jason Williams talk? Okay, yeah, we didn't. I apologize. That was a really good talk. It could be recorded elsewhere, I'm not too sure, but it was really good. And so if you can start to track these actors based off of mistakes that they make, you're going to be in a pretty good position. And you know, commonly used within credential phishing is a drop email address. So all of the credentials that a victim will put into that phishing page will be sent to a particular email address. It's very common for that to happen. And you can burn that email address. You can have an impact on that adversary. Well, they will not gain any information, right? If you report that Gmail address that the adversary is using to Gmail, that guy just lost access to that, and you probably just saved 30,000 credentials from being compromised. And so I think that belongs here. That's definitely kind of that tip of the spear kind of thing. Anything else?
Does the box work? Oh,
hey, the box
what's up?
is working.
All right, you can model anywhere, Brandon. Have you thought through, like, so responding back to the phisher guys, right? So putting an iframe in an email with a picture in it, so when you send it back to the bad guy, spoofed back to them, you can maybe identify the true source IP, user agent string, anything like that.
I haven't thought of that.
I had some conversations at DEF CON with some people.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. So kind of using those canaries, right, in order to track where the actors are going?
Yep, and that's kind of what we were talking about is how and techniques that marketers will use to figure out who we do, and use that against the people pitching us.
Yeah, that's good. Where do you think that fits in the maturity model? Here?
Yeah.
Adaptive? So. Yeah. I think you're right. And there are some, there are probably some legal business decisions to make in order to engage with adversaries in that way. Give that guy a regular mic.
So the person I was talking to may have been law enforcement, and his decision was, or his comments were, I'm not a lawyer, but if you do this, yeah, you know who it is. Yep, we were talking. I might have had some drinks. He said, I'm not a lawyer, but if you do this of your own accord, you're probably okay as long as you're not malicious and you're sticking to those marketing type tactics. In a business scenario, I would talk to the legal team before you actually do this, right? As an independent researcher, you'd probably be okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
And so I really like, when we talk about wire transfers, right? So a really common methodology of executive impersonation is, hey, CFO, we just bought this company, and I need you to send $10 million to this particular destination. Well, if you can interact with that adversary and say, hey, man, I tried to send $10 million to that address or to that particular wire destination, and it didn't work. I need another one. You can start to report these into banking destinations, and you'll just start burning the adversary's infrastructure. And I think that definitely belongs here into that adaptive. So before, one of the things that we talked about in Risk Informed was really around gathering information. When we went into repeatable, you're starting to use that information. When you get into adaptable, you're starting to burn the adversary's infrastructure. I like that as a maturity model.
To add to that, wherever that information's coming back, I'd definitely not have it come back to your company. Somewhere definitely not tied to your company. So you all of a sudden they figure out what you're doing, and they're like, oh, we're going to target them even more.
Yeah. Avoid becoming a target of interest.
Not everybody would think of that, but Yeah, not here.
Yeah, I like that. Avoid becoming a person of interest to an adversary.
Randomized cloud service, just kind of like what they're doing.
Yeah, mail.com. All right, cool. All right, was there something else, man? Did you have something? Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify for myself if the technical recommendations would be like the multi-factor authentication for the users. Things that users can do at the adaptive level to
Yep.
not save their passwords in their browser.
Yeah, it definitely can, right? So like when you talk about multi-factor authentication, man, stupid laptop, stupid corporate policy that makes the screensaver turn on. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about, because really that's a bigger thing, right, with phishing and how you combat phishing, right? So like compromised credentials, I guess, is really what you're talking about. And so maybe MFA, maybe that's a stage in there. I would really hope that MFA here would be a pretty low maturity state, to be honest with you. Yeah, and so, no, I didn't think about that. Yeah, and this focuses more on like a security analyst kind of a focus, right? Someone that's going to be responding to it, right? We're doing phishing investigations, not necessarily, making strategic moves to combat what happens after you get phished. But I could see it fitting in here, right? Like partial, you just have username and passwords on your Office 365 tenant. Well, man, you're going to get popped there eventually, right? We know that. Risk informed, maybe you're doing, SMS-based, right? All the way up to adaptive, where you're doing certificate-based, plus biometrics, plus location awareness. Yeah, who knows what that might look like. But I think there's probably a spot in there for that. What's up?
Where would you put, like, maybe hunting and maybe going to those open mailboxes that are on certain mails, like, was it MailChimp or mail.com or something? Where you're.
What do you mean open mailboxes?
Like there's some generic mail forums out there where.
Like 10-minute mail?
10-minute mail or whatever, where it's open to everybody and you can use it. And then there's just certain mailboxes.
I've not heard of this thing. So there's like a service where anybody can send an email to and anybody can go view it?
Yes.
Why would anybody want that? For testing. That's like it's like a crappy version of 10-minute mail. Yeah, I don't know. I've not thought about where hunting fits in there. What do you guys think? I think there's probably a spot for it. Yeah, what do you mean by hunting?
You're literally digging through your own mail and mailbox for maybe keyword lists or something like that, but you're actually actively hunting through your own mail, as well as if there's any like open mailboxes out there that are not.
So here might be, as you were talking there, I was thinking a hunting example might be looking for forwarding messages coming out of my emails. Or looking for, forwarding rules being configured on mailboxes, right? Or perhaps auto-delete messages, like auto-delete rules, where every message that comes out of this mailbox is being deleted. Yeah, like using those kind of, like if this mailbox is compromised, what would an attacker do? Well, we definitely see them clean up after themselves by deleting messages that they send.
I think this kind of ties into what I'm going to say. I think there should almost be something after adaptive. For that piece.
There isn't such a thing, man. It's a 4-tier model. I mean, I'm working with the framework that the government produced.
We all know the government's not always right.
Yeah, no. I don't know what you're talking about. I trust my government.
Sorry if anybody's from the government here.
Yeah.
So the repeatable part, you're trying to sell to your management that there's a problem. And you're trying to get extra money for tools and everything.
Yeah.
I'd say the adaptive part, that's where you're implementing a lot of your tools that you're able to get budget for. So that way you can stop these attacks and be more defensive about it. And then you're not spinning all your cycles on the partial.
Yep.
And then at that point, you have more resources of people to then go out and hunt. So maybe this is the hunting would be part of this, but I think it's dependent on implementing those tool sets to help defend and protect the environment.
Yeah. That's interesting.
That's why I said there should be a 5-part.
Yeah,
Because you really can't do.
I don't disagree with
without
you,
the
man.
tools. So.
I don't disagree with you at all.
It's the magical 5-piece. It's the unicorn.
So let's say, what would you call that?
I'm going to call it the unicorn.
Unicorn. I like it. The unicorn maturity state. I can get on board with that, actually. I totally can. Because it's kind of one of those things where, like, dude, if you're doing this, I mean, I don't know what company you're working for, but you guys are kicking ass, right? So.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully.
As far as I know.
Yeah. Or this is like the only thing that you guys are doing, right? It's one of those two things. So, all right, sweet.
I have no idea about anything else. It's just
What's up, man?
I'm just thinking what you were saying about kind of makes me think of getting back to your roots. So you can be as adaptive as you want, but if you're missing.
It helps if you hold it at the top.
Partial. Sorry. Did I hold it?
There you go. Yeah,
okay.
Like that. You got it.
Sorry.
Don't move it.
If you miss those partial things from the beginning, then you're back where you started. If you think everything's automated and you have all these protections in place, you're always going to have a new hire. You're always going to have somebody that doesn't know. So you're going to have to start over at the.
I'm gonna take what I think I know what you're talking about, which is really control validation, right? So if you've achieved repeatable, you'd better be testing against partial because you might have made a mistake somewhere along the line, right? Like you could have that new hire that's not very good, and now you've got a gap achieving your partial maturity model.
Or somebody else made a mistake if you have it.
Yeah,
There you go. Yeah,
whatever the scenario, right? Your network changed, and now you lost visibility, and nobody knows, right? I like some method of control validation in there. That could be a red team engagement. That could be automated, I don't know, we try to send an email every week that looks just like this, and our SOC had better respond to it the same way every time. Yeah.
Unless a phisher sees those automated emails at some point and kind of piggybacks on you.
No, that's cool if they do, because then they'll be caught, right? If our controls are working, then they're going to be caught. I like the aspect of control validation, making sure that you're still achieving the maturity state that you think that you are, right? Did I summarize that well enough? All right, sweet. Dudes, I went way over my time. I feel sorry for our actual featured speakers because I went over like 30 minutes. So we'll probably take a short break, I'm guessing, and then we'll get at it. Hey, I really appreciate this conversation. Oh, I was going to end, but I turned on too many sticky keys. Hold on. I got one more slide. So threat intel sharing out on Slack, a lot of phishing stuff going on there. We start to share a lot of it, subjects, more of those atomic indicators. But check us out on Slack if you're not already there. Thanks, guys.